Space is used in Indian, basic Indian philosophy, in Vedanta. It is called Akasha. And Akasha is for them the fundamental element. There are 5 elements: earth, water, air, and fire, and Akasha. And so space contains all the other elements. In Buddhist philosophy, where the ultimate reality is called Shunyata, the void, the Chinese will translate the Sanskrit Shunyata with their character that means sky or space. And the Taoists would say, quoting Lao Tzu, the usefulness of a window is not so much in the frame as in the empty space through which something can be seen. The usefulness of a vase is not so much in the sides made of clay as in the hollow inside into which something can be put. And of course that is a startling metaphor for a Westerner, because we think the other way round, you see. As I started out to say, we really think commonsensically that space is nothing at all. And we are much more sympathetic to the idea that it's pure abstraction than to the Oriental idea that space has some kind of basic reality. It bothers us too when astronomers talk about curved space. How can nothing be curved? Or properties of space? Or expanding space? How can it do that? And then when architects begin to talk about the functions of spaces, the commonsensical Westerner thinks, why don't they talk about the functions of walls? Of course, the walls enclose spaces, but the spaces of themselves have no function. And they're bothered about this. Painters also are very aware of space, because especially if you paint in oils, you have to paint your background. And therefore, in filling it in, you begin to realize that it has its own shape. It is the obverse of the foreground. And when you play with photographic negatives, or anything that switches foreground to background, you begin to become aware of space as having a shape. The interval between all sorts of objects becomes for you something significant, even though it's constantly flowing and changing, as indeed are the objects within the space. So it is a kind of a bit of a shock to our common sense, which in most cases has not caught up with 20th century physics or astronomy, to hear space considered as something effective, as something definitely there, so that you could say it has properties. Take another case of space, which is rather startling. There are different kinds of space. Space is basically, isn't it, an interval. There is an interval between each one of us sitting here. If we didn't have that, we would suffocate by being packed together like sardines. We need space in order to function as a human being. We need a kind of area in which to gesture and move and walk about and breathe and express ourselves. Now, you can have intervals not only in space but in time. Pauses are intervals. You can also have intervals in sound, the intervals between tones or notes. And the interesting thing about the intervals between tones is that they are that upon which the hearing of melody depends. Melody is to hear melody is to hear intervals. Now, if you will simply visualize melody in terms of something graphic, supposing you represent a simple, say, introduction of a fugue, or whatever, you know, you can see that in terms of a dancing line or a series of points at different levels representing, like musical notation, the high ones and the low ones. And you will recognize a pattern. But you see at once that the pattern depends on the way the critical dots in it are spaced. And it doesn't matter much whether the space is a big space or whether it's a little one, because it will always be relative to the size of the dots. You can magnify it or minify it, but you will see it is the way they are spaced that makes the difference. And here once again we are using spaced as a transitive verb now. We've talked about spaces or distances increasing, or people increasing a distance, and now we can talk about space as a verb, to space, to be spaced. And so once again the language is either playing tricks on us or else expressing a profound intuition. Language does both, and you have to watch out for which it is. Of course, it may be both. That is a possibility. But here at once you see, especially in that illustration of music, of it being necessary to hear intervals in order to hear melody, you see that the way things are spaced is really another way of talking about the way things are related. So you begin to realize that space is relationship.